have the Ayatollah of fantasy rock and roller with us today, Adam Rank. How you doing, Rank?
They look great in person, and I just can't wait till next year we can pack it full of 25,000.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. I didn't know it was Ball Guys Day. It was being ranked. I mean, how do you lose?
This is the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast.
Hello, and welcome back to the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast presented by the Fantasy Points Media Group. And this is episode number 119 on the show about nothing, the show that covers everything. And as always, I am joined with my host this week, Major Caldwell. How you doing today, Major?
I'm good, man. I'm excited for this show. Let's go.
And speaking of that show, on today's show, we welcome a man who has been writing for the Vikings and the NFL for 8 years, specializing in deep dive analysis using both film and analytics to break down the most pressing questions surrounding the team. You may also recognize his work from the LA Times, Forbes, MSNBC, the Bleacher Report, and of course, The Athletic, where he's been since 2018. Please welcome Arif Hasan to the show. How are you doing, Arif?
That was quite the walk-up. Wow. I'm good, man. How are you?
Hey, I'm glad we finally got this kind of kick-started here. I mean, we've been trying to get you on the show here for another couple of years, and we just hit you at just the right time because it is legal tampering season in the National Football League right before NFL free agency, and we're seeing all kinds of things go down, including the Dallas Cowboys, Denver Broncos, Gregory saga. Is he, isn't he, is he? Maybe some wording on the language. Then it comes to the CBA, maybe some dirty pool by the agent. But hey, that is what legal tampering is all about. We should know this by now. We've seen this. Eric Kendricks is a good example. I think a couple of years ago, he had a very similar situation to what we're seeing with Gregory. He was a Jet for about 30 seconds and then kind of came back.
It was Anthony Barr. It was the other
Anthony
UCLA
Barr,
linebacker that played for the Vikings. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're very familiar with how this kind of shakes out there, and so are Minnesota Vikings fans here. And of course, like I said, you've been covering the Minnesota Vikings for about 8 years now, so you are our inside guy when it comes to the Vikings, especially over at The Athletic, who basically have an all-star team across the country covering all your favorite teams. And hey, up here in Canada, if you want to get yourself a little bit of a 3-month subscription to that, roll up the rim with Tim Hortons, because I rolled up the rim and I got myself a 3-month subscription to The Athletic. Or you can go ahead and I think they got like dollar days going on down there for 1 month. You get $1, so on and so forth. So little shout out to The Athletic before we kick off this show. Whoo! Got some energy here kicking off. Got my coffee ready to go.
I see. It's going to be one of those coffee shows. Let's go.
Yeah, so if you are not aware what the coffee show is, it is slow your podcast down right now. I know lots of people like to play their podcast at 1.5 speed. Do not do that. I'm telling you right now. It's going to sound like Alvin Chipmunks, but baritone style. It's not going to be a pretty thing. You see, I can't even speak properly right now. I'm already going at 1.5, 2. But hey, let's get into some of the news and notes here from around the league. And let's kick off with the Kirk Cousins extension. There was rumors about DeShaun Watson possibly going there at some point. Some other quarterbacks related to the Minnesota Vikings situation. Arif, what do you know on Kirk Cousins and kind of how did we get there? Because you know what, Kirk Cousins, I'm sorry, Vikings fans, you guys are too hard on the guy. He's a good player right now. And when you look around the National Football League and you look around the draft this year, are you going to find a quarterback better than Kirk Cousins right now? Arif, is this maybe why the Vikings are like, yeah, it ain't good out there right now?
Yeah, I think that's got to be part of it. I think that so the issue is I've been a critic of Kirk Cousins for quite a while. There's a lot of pieces that I've written up at The Athletic that you can look at that criticize kind of his level of play and his style of play in terms of what it can bring to the Vikings when they try to make a playoff push or a push for a Super Bowl win. And in that context, he can be a very frustrating quarterback. But in terms of how good of a quarterback he is compared to, most other quarterbacks, you put him on a level playing field, you play him against each other. I would say that he's, maybe about 10th or something like that. And the extension that the Vikings offered him lowered his cap hit from $45 million this year to $31.5 million, 31.4, something like that. So that saved about $14 million against the cap. And though, if you look up like the cap rankings, he's like 5th or 6th. I think just generally speaking, if you get a top 10 quarterback for about 15% of the cap, you're in a good spot. I think that's actually a good deal kind of in a vacuum. I think that most teams would be in a good spot allocating 15% of their resources to a quarterback that's generally speaking like top 8. It kind of depends. If Tom Brady had retired, would have moved him up the rankings a little bit, would have looked a little bit better. But given how weak the NFC is, maybe there are some opportunities there, right? Especially because there's only basically 2 quarterbacks, Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. So that kind of makes things a little bit easier to swallow. It does commit the Vikings a little bit longer to Kirk Cousins. Plus, when his contract is up, which is in 2024, essentially, the Vikings have to, because the way the void years work and the way you spread out the signing bonuses and all that, the Vikings will have to take on $12.5 million in dead cap space for a year that he's not going to be there. So that's the cost of lowering the cap, essentially, is that you get Kirk Cousins at a more reasonable cap number. But the question really is, if you can build a team around Kirk Cousins, that'll be enough for him to take it, into the Super Bowl and win. And that one is a very concerning one for me, because the Vikings had a number of players, not just Justin Jefferson, but a number of players under contract that were on rookie contracts that could overperform really substantially. Then I wouldn't really mind it as much. But the problem for me is you need him to be the best quarterback on the field for 4 consecutive games in the playoffs. And in the playoffs, those quarterbacks are better, right? Now, when you have a quarterback that's about as good, say like Matthew Stafford, it's about as good as Kirk Cousins. Matthew Stafford is so, I don't care, that there are some days that he's going to be the worst quarterback on the field when the 20th best quarterback is opposite him, and the best quarterback on the field when the 3rd best quarterback is opposite him, right? He's volatile. And so he can turn in some really high level performances. That's kind of why Eli Manning ended up with a couple of runs. He was not, I would argue a top 5 quarterback during his run, but there are days that he is. I don't know that Kirk Cousins has those days. So that's my issue, is that he's a very consistent quarterback, which is good in terms of getting you to the postseason. But if he is who he is, once you get there at the end, I don't know that he can, play against, say, a Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers and necessarily just be the best quarterback on the field. So that's kind of the question that Vikings fans are kind of dealing with. Plus, is it time to move on? The roster's a little bit old. They've been like about 500 over the last 2 seasons. Is it time to kind of blow it up? What are we doing? So that's kind of what's surrounding it. But I think in a vacuum, that's not a bad deal, getting a quarterback of that talent for $31.5 million.
I like both those comparisons of Matthew Stafford and Eli Manning. And they both had some pretty good magical runs in the playoffs. Stafford last year, Eli that one year. I think they were number 1 and number 2 in single season postseason passing. What we've seen from Matthew Stafford this year and Eli Manning a few years back, I think it was on the 2nd Super Bowl run. Now, I think this 1-year extension is, you're our quarterback right now. You're not our forever quarterback. Mm-hmm. There's nothing out there right now that really catches our eye. Kellen Mond is probably not quite ready there. I know Vikings fans want to see him a little bit more. He kind of got a bum deal with some of the other quarterbacks that got a little bit of run ahead of him here last year. How far out do you think Kellen Mond is right at this moment?
Yeah, this is going to be a really critical offseason for him, because if the Vikings do decide to re-sign Sean Mannion and Kellen Mond can't beat him out in his 2nd year as a quarterback with an offensive-minded coach with a pretty good, probably quarterback. I mean, I guess I don't know for sure, but probably a pretty good quarterback coaching staff around him. That's probably it for him. If he can't beat out Sean Mannion, I'm not saying he has to prove that he's a starting quality quarterback by year 2, but Sean Mannion is not a super high bar to beat, right? I understand a 3rd-round rookie not beating that bar, entering the NFL, learning a new offense, learning a new style of play, probably being forced to adjust your footwork, your throwing mechanics and all that. Everything's a little bit faster. His tempo was off in training camp, which is why he ended up being the 3rd quarterback on the roster. I get that. I think that a lot of quarterbacks that get drafted in the middle rounds, if they do end up having starting talent, sometimes it takes a while for that to show up. Not everyone's a Dak Prescott or a Russell Wilson. So that makes Kirk Cousins is actually a really good example of that. So that makes sense, I think. But I think by year 2, you should be able to beat out, some mid-tier backup quality quarterbacks. And so that's what we're probably going to see. And right now, we haven't seen anything that indicates that he will. Like I said, that's not, a sign that he won't, right? I don't think that we need to be pessimistic about him, but he hasn't shown anything that demonstrates that he's good enough. I mean, he had 3 passes all year, right? Or I guess 3 snaps, I should say, 2 passes all year, both in the Green Bay game because Kirk Cousins got COVID. So Sean Mannion had to play, missed a couple of snaps because there was an injury scare. Kellen Mond comes in, throws 2 or 3 passes. One of them should have been a pick 6, right? And that's the sample that we have. A dropped pick 6 from a linebacker. And it kind of showed up when he was in training camp in the preseason. He just wasn't ready. So we're going to kind of have to see if he can do that. Otherwise, and I wouldn't be shocked if it happened this year, but next year makes a little bit more sense because you've got that extra year of the Kirk Cousins contract. They might draft a quarterback to try and develop or compete with Kellen Mond because you don't have a future at quarterback right now.
Yeah, when you look at this draft class coming in, I don't know there's a big gap between what Kellen Mond can give you and what we're seeing right now. I mean, in the years past, we've seen quarterbacks that, okay, he's number 1 overall pick, number 2 overall pick. We're not talking about that right now. We're like, okay, Malik Willis, he may go number 9. He may go number 6. Kenny Pickett, same thing. But I'm looking at this right now. I'm looking at my draft rankings from last year where Kellen Mond kind of was. I'm looking at what I got now. I'm like, there's not much of an upside to making one of these selections, especially if you're going to have to use a first-round pick on one of these guys when you've already got Kellen Mond already in the building. Now, so it's safe to say the Vikings are probably not going to be drafting a quarterback, at least not in the first few rounds, at least in this draft. What are some of the players' positions that they're kind of targeting? What are you hearing there in Minnesota? And if they're not targeting in the draft, what kind of free agency rumors are we hearing right now for the Vikings? Who are they in on? Who are they not in on? What do they need to do this offseason?
Sure. Yeah. If you take a look at who played the most snaps on defense for the Vikings last year, at cornerback, you ended up with Patrick Peterson, Mackenzie Alexander, and Bashaud Breeland, with Cameron Dancer, second-year player, right after them. All 3 of those players I just named are gone. Right? They're free agents, or actually Bashaud Breeland was cut, but he would have been a free agent anyway. So they don't have a starting cornerback on the roster. Now, if they're lucky, Cameron Dancer can develop into that guy. I'm a little skeptical of that happening, but that's a possibility. But that still leaves 2 cornerbacks that you need to have on your roster. And so, they haven't signed, as far as I know, as of this recording, they haven't signed a cornerback to the roster. So they need 2. And I think that has to come in one of the first 2 rounds. I think that you absolutely need to get that cornerback. Also, as you're switching to a new system, a 3-4 system, you probably want to find ways to generate pressure, especially because all the guys that they have in the middle are run stuffers. I mean, they just signed Harrison Phillips. They let go Michael Pierce, but Harrison Phillips is primarily a run stuffer. Dalvin Tomlinson, who's going to be playing next to him, is primarily a run stuffer. The best backup tackle that they have is probably Armand Watts. He's a run stuffer. Right. And so you probably need to generate some pass rush alongside Danielle Hunter. So I wouldn't be shocked if they ended up with a pass rusher of some sort, whether that's an edge rusher, which seems a little bit more likely. Maybe that comes in the first 2 rounds, or maybe, and this seems a little unlikely, but certainly in the realm of possibility, some kind of interior defender that you can play in a 3-4 defense, right? Somebody who's going to play, defensive end would be a defensive tackle in most systems. And so I think that that's going to be the most likely scenarios, that they'll end up going on defense, probably a cornerback of some sort. And then there are other areas of the roster that you need to fill out. Like, I don't think they have an answer at one of the guard spots or one of the center spots, honestly. So there's 2 interior players that you really need to fill out. That might occur in the first couple of rounds as well. But I would think that because they have a big need at cornerback, that they need 2 players there as opposed to 1 player at guard, 1 player at center, 1 player at edge rusher, etc. I think that you would likely find a cornerback going probably before any other position, unless that position ends up being pretty barren.
We've seen a little bit of an exodus of corners in recent years there from Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Some going to Cincinnati, some out of the league for a year. Jeff Gladney looks like he's already talking with the Arizona Cardinals here this offseason here as a potential landing spot. So I think they lost, 3 last year via free agency? And then obviously Jeff Gladney as well.
Yeah, so they lost 3 cornerbacks in a row, and then they lost 3 cornerbacks in a row again, or rather they started new players again. So they lost Xavier Rhodes. He went to the Indianapolis Colts that year. They lost Trey Waynes. He went to the Cincinnati Bengals that year, but was injured, didn't get to play. And then Mackenzie Alexander, who went, I believe, to the Bengals also as well. I'm not super confident in that one. And so they didn't have them. And the 3 stars that they had included, Jeff Gladney and Cameron Dancer, as well as, like Chris Boyd and some other kind of back of the roster guys, people that aren't even in the league anymore, like Chris Jones. Chris Jones, the cornerback, which, is not a very common name, I think. But that was not acceptable to the Vikings. So then they signed, Patrick Peterson. They re-signed Mackenzie Alexander. And then they signed Bashaud Breeland to start. And now all those guys are gone. So if you take a look at who started games for the Minnesota Vikings over the past 3 years, you end up with probably 8 different players, with Mackenzie Alexander showing up 2 non-consecutive years. That's wild to me. Starting game 1, you end up with like 8 or 9 different names, and players like, Holton Hill, who isn't in the league anymore, as far as I can tell. And if he is, he's certainly not competing for a starting job. That's a pretty rough spot to be in, especially because the prior defensive regime was run by a guy that was essentially a defensive backs coach that he takes credit for, like Roy Williams in Dallas and Deion Sanders in Atlanta. This is a guy that has done a really good job developing 5th and 6th round picks and starting quality safeties like George Aloka, right? He's the guy that developed Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes and Mackenzie Alexander. And so for that defense, which is fairly dependent on cornerbacks, to just not have guys was pretty devastating. And it turns out those guys weren't good enough, so they needed to get a new set of guys. But all those guys signed 1-year contracts, and so they're no longer on the team. They could re-sign, Alexander or Peterson, right? That seems well within the realm of possibility, but that just is going to be a glaring need for the Vikings until they can lock down a long-term contract at that position.
Yeah, when it comes to the Vikings, though, all the stuff you said is amazing. There's only one question. Will we finally get that Irv Smith Jr. breakout?
Yeah, this is a fantasy podcast. I should talk a little bit more about that, huh? Yeah. I think that there's that possibility. And I know that I'm like copping out, essentially. I'm hedging my bets with that kind of statement. But the reason that I'm curious is you take a look at tight ends with his draft pedigree and his history over the past, 2-3 years. And you think there's not a huge likelihood of breakout. I think historically, players of this profile, they usually see the field and they usually perform a little bit better than he has, right? Obviously, injury plays a huge role. He didn't get to see the field at all this last year. But, generally speaking, you're not going to see a late breakout from a tight end in that capacity. You would have seen something, maybe not like 500 yards, but you would have seen something, right? I think that the reason that you can be a little bit more optimistic about Irv Smith, though, is because the Vikings themselves, and I can basically just report this, the Vikings are excited about what Irv Smith can bring. The new coaching staff thinks that there are some ways to use Irv Smith that better fit his skill set than what he's been used as. And I think that makes a lot of sense. He never struck me as a traditional tight end. He's obviously a little bit shorter. He's obviously much faster, but he's not very agile. And that actually shows up in his testing scores. His like 3-cone and short shuttle are like pretty awful. And his 40-yard dash was the fastest in his class, I think. Which is why everyone was so excited about him in the first place. And when you look at what he was doing at Alabama, it was very much, let's take advantage of the speed. There's some times where he has to turn a corner, like when he is, for some reason, the sweep and the fly sweep, that's fun, right? But, primarily, he's a seam stretcher. He's making sure that defenses can't play too high safety. He's going to run up the middle in a lot of ways, like the way Vernon Davis was used in San Francisco or the way Jordan Reed was used in Washington. Bring guys that feel like they can use a particular type of tight end in a very specific way instead of drafting a guy that you think is good and then having him do tight end stuff. Right. Figure out what he's good at and have him do that stuff. Right. And I think that that's the way the Vikings are approaching Irv Smith this year. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for him. It really depends on what Tyler Conklin's market is. He's hitting free agency. It might be difficult for the Vikings to re-sign him because we saw the deal that Ian Thomas got with the Panthers, one that I think no one understands. If I'm an agent of a potential starting quality tight end like Tyler Conklin, I'm looking at that deal and saying, yeah, no, absolutely not. There is no way an agent is going to beat me on Ian Thomas for someone like Tyler Conklin. We are getting a better deal than what Ian Thomas got. I'm going to 30 other teams. I'm going to go to the Panthers to see if they want to pay Tyler Conklin more than they paid Ian Thomas. So I think it'll be tough to re-sign him. But if that's the case, if it's difficult to bring him back, then Irv Smith is basically unless they draft a guy, which I already mentioned, they've got a couple of draft needs to be difficult. Plus the tight end class at the top is whatever. It's very deep, but at the top of the draft, it's not spectacular. I think that there's just going to be a lot of opportunity available, especially because this is an offense that if you track it kind of through the Rams and just historically, what Sean McVay does is that they do like to have the one tight end. They played a lot more 2 tight end last year, and it was the Super Bowl run. It was not a nothing year, right? But they do like to play a lot of 1 tight end and feature that 1 tight end along with 3 receivers. The Vikings are constructed a little bit differently, so we're going to see some different stuff. But that tight end is usually a big part of the offense.
Yeah, we're going to find out if Evan Thomas has that Christian Kirk agent here right now as we hit into the offseason. We know the NFL has probably done this better than any sport out there in eliminating the offseason, especially this year. This has been more active than I can remember. And we go from, before we get into legal tampering, which we will here in a second, we got to get into the trade season because we got some new faces in new places via trade. And I just going to ask you about 4 players here right now who have been traded and just kind of a quick 2-minute thoughts on how this affects the teams that they're going to and how this affects them moving forward. And starting off with Russell Wilson going from the Seahawks to the Denver Broncos in a deal that I actually think works better for Seattle than it does for Denver long term.
It really depends on what you think was the cause of Russell Wilson's underperformance this last season, for sure. I think that it was probably injury related. I think, they mentioned a finger injury and stuff like that. Seems like that might be important. I think that fundamentally Russell Wilson is a good quarterback. And if that's the case, right? Like, obviously he has shown in the past that he's a top 5 quarterback, and you end up with like very weird statistics. Like, he has like fewer MVP votes than like Bobby Wagner or something like that. Yeah, right. Like it's kind of wild. But he has been a top 5 quarterback for most of his career. I don't think that disappeared. I don't think it's solely reliant on his ability to generate yards after scrambles and being an athletic quarterback. I think he's got that in them, right? And I think that going to a really talented receiving core, even after losing Noah Fant, going to a really talented receiving core and probably a better offensive line, I think that he's in a really good spot. So I think that that's going to be good. The issue from a winning perspective is that you're now like in the most insane division in football. Like I don't know if I can think of a time when a quarterback as good as Derek Carr was the worst quarterback in the division. And it's probably not close. Right?
I think you just messed up, man. Like,
that's you
Matt's
mentioned
guy.
Bobby Wagner with more MVP votes than Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson has the fewest MVP votes in that division. Well, I guess Justin Herbert hasn't got one yet, but Justin Herbert's going to get that MVP vote.
Yeah.
I'm just saying Derek Carr is the second most MVP votes in that division. Just throwing that out there right now.
Yeah, I knew it was coming.
Derek Carr's a good quarterback, but you can't convince me he's better than Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes. You can't. You cannot do it.
You know what? So, the numbers don't lie last year. I mean, he wasn't quite above them, but he was right there. I mean, you have 3 quarterbacks that were in the passing in the top 5.
He wasn't above them, so he's not better than them.
No, exactly. Much respect
Thank
to
you.
Russell Wilson.
Logic. Thank you. See, that's how logic works, Matt. That's how logic works.
You don't understand logic, Major. Don't worry about it.
I've been trying to do this Russell every Wilson, week. You have no idea. I've been trying to do this every week. Oh my God. Thank you.
Russell Wilson, we dog him a little bit there based on those numbers last year, those overall numbers. But we're not seeing is those yards per attempt, yards per reception. He was actually right up there with guys like Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes when you average that out through the whole season. Was it the finger that affected him? Probably a little bit. But for me, Russell Wilson, he's not running the way he used to be, and that's where he had the most success. Does he get back to that in Denver? We'll see how that goes. Now, speaking of guys who are going, we watched Carson Wentz go from Indianapolis to Washington, and Indianapolis still doesn't have a quarterback. That should tell you all you need to know about Carson Wentz and the situation there. Quickly, Carson Wentz, just touch on that.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to see who Indianapolis technically has on their roster at quarterback right now. But I was going to say it was an upgrade regardless of the name that you said, but actually now I'm a little bit concerned.
By the way, Sam Ehlinger is treading on Sleeper app right now. If you're looking for that free agent.
Right. I'm about to go pick him up right now.
One of the only Texas quarterbacks to not be considered at some point to tight end. Really, really fantastic stuff.
Good point.
But I don't know if there's the winner in the trade. Obviously, I think is Indianapolis, even though they're not going to end up having a quarterback. But like, I cannot think of like a more appropriate team for Carson Wentz to go to than Washington. Because it's in division, right? So you've got or in the division that he used to be in. So you've got like all of this hilarious drama. Cowboys fans can continue dunking on Eagles fans for the quarterback that they don't even have on their roster anymore. They can dunk on Washington fans. Yeah, I think that that's really just wonderful. Yeah, just in terms of how funny it is. But also clearly the most dysfunctional organization in the NFL, a league not known for functional organizations like that. That's wonderful to me. And then Carson Wentz, everywhere he's gone, he's left like trails of broken dreams. So he creates dysfunction. And I'm so excited to see how that breaks down, because there are so many great people covering, the Washington Commanders that, a couple of years after the fact, we're going to hear some phenomenal stories about what Carson Wentz and Dan Snyder been up with, and what poor Jason Wright and Ron Rivera have to deal with, like trying to tread water there. So absolutely great news for me personally, a guy who writes about sports. Probably not wonderful news for Washington.
I love this one because I compared this kind of move in Carson Wentz to kind of like a family kind of breaking up a little bit there, and the dog not knowing which way to go. But luckily because Carson Wentz, he gets to play both Indianapolis and Philadelphia this year, 3 times between the two teams.
Beautiful.
The Colts and the Eagles are still going to be able to catch passes from Carson Wentz this year, which is absolutely fantastic.
So great.
Now, we mentioned that arms race in the AFC West there. We talked about Russell Wilson go. We see teams loading up on everything in that AFC West. Well, the Chargers got in there too, and they got themselves Khalil Mack, who I find this funny because 2 players we're going to talk about here being traded are both former Oakland Raiders, who both were traded in 2018, literally 2 months apart from one another, and now they were traded like 2 days apart from one another. Watch first Khalil Mack going from the Bears to the Chargers, and then Amari Cooper going from the Dallas Cowboys to the Cleveland Browns. Just kind of some quick hit on both those guys real quick, if you may.
Yeah, so pairing somebody with Joey Bosa, that is really just beautiful, right? Okay, yeah, we're on the same page here.
Yeah.
That I think is great. The fact that they were able to sign J.C. Jackson, who was probably the top player on the market.
Yeah.
Just like period. That's going to be great because the Chargers, obviously they've got a lot of potential in offense. We'll see kind of what happens with Mike Williams, but they've got a ton of potential in offense. They want a defense that keeps up. And being able to do that is just going to make that team actually competitive with one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time in Patrick Mahomes. Like I think that division just seems so fun, right? Like how was Patrick Mahomes shut down in the Super Bowl? He was shut down with a pass rush. Now, obviously, having just an abysmal offensive line due to injury played a really big role in that. But the functional result is that it was a ton of pass rush pressure. What do the Chargers do? They get a bunch of pass rush pressure, and then they make sure that, Mahomes just cannot get rid of the ball quickly by getting somebody like J.C. Jackson. I love it. And then you get like a versatile piece like Derwin James. He's one of the best blitzing safeties in the NFL. You've got all kinds of options. I mean, Khalil Mack, a lot of people got really mad at Oakland when Khalil Mack was asked to drop back in coverage. And I totally understand, right? Because he is more valuable rushing the passer, but he can cover. Like for a linebacker, like at any inside linebacker, it doesn't, he can cover, right? Which is the nuts thing to me. And if you do these replacement blitzes with Derwin James and have Khalil Mack drop back just a little bit, you can create some really wonderful confusion and still not sacrifice, what you've got going on in the back end. So I think that the Chargers are doing some really, really interesting stuff. You got a pretty good defensive mind of Brandon Staley kind of running things and making sure that the pieces that he has can do what he wants. So that I think is pretty wonderful. Now, Amari Cooper to the Browns, I think that Cooper is a very talented receiver. I also thought that Odell Beckham was a very talented receiver. Both of them have some rumors with in terms of their ability to kind of meet with a locker room, especially a locker room that's underperforming, right? And so you need to make sure that your locker room is great. And the Browns tried to do that. I mean, having somebody like Jarvis Landry in your locker room who's friends with Odell Beckham, who is a remarkable locker room leader, still couldn't keep that pipe down. Like you still couldn't figure that out. And so your quarterback needs to be a really good leader in order for that to happen. Baker Mayfield's really good at commercials. That's like he's phenomenal. I love his commercials, right?
Yeah, but Baker Mayfield's never been compared to Kirk Cousins.
That's a fake tweet. That's a fake tweet.
That's a fake tweet.
It's a great tweet. It's wonderful. We should enter it into the canon. I'm fine assuming that it's true, but I just got to get it out there. No, yeah. So Amari Cooper is he's more likely to do stuff like run the routes that are assigned to him, run them at the right depths at the right precision. But I think that is sometimes an overrated trait. I mean, Chad Ochocinco also did not run, quote unquote, the right routes with the right precision. And in some offenses, like with the Patriots offense, that just wasn't a good fit. But in most offenses, you find a way to find the guy that's open and throw it to him, right? Like even your timing oriented West Coast style quarterbacks like Joe Burrow can figure out like, hey man, Jamar Chase is doing some weird stuff. Let's see what happens here. And it works. Like, so you just got to figure it out. Right. And if your excuse is that my receiver is getting open all the time, but the wrong way, I don't know. So I don't know that somebody who's getting open the right way, Amari Cooper, is necessarily going to be that much more of a boost for that offense. But my hope is kind of similar to the Russell Wilson situation that Baker Mayfield has been dealing with a shoulder issue, non-throwing shoulder, but he had to wear a harness basically the entire year. And that really tanked his performance in a big way. And I think that explains more of what happened than anything involving locker room discord or anything involving, Baker Mayfield suddenly falling off despite playing in the same system. Obviously the offensive line was really, really remarkable 2 years ago, but last year it wasn't, up to the same standard. But it was still a good offensive line. So I think that the hope is that it was an injury related issue for Baker Mayfield. And if that's the case, Amari Cooper is going to produce really, really well. But Mayfield is a guy that is striving to be as good as Kirk Cousins. And that is a very weird spot to be in.
And that's leaving the door open for.
Well,
Watson.
we'll get there. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. Cooper coming, obviously, that meant the end of Jarvis Landry. But was that a prelude to DeShaun Watson? We'll see. He met with the team. Who knows what's going on there? We won't get into that until we can get into that. But what we can get into is a quarterback who earned himself a good whopping 2-year, $14 million contract with incentives and all that other stuff that could go up to $28 million. And that is Mitch Trubisky or Mitch Pitsky or whatever you want to call it. You can throw Pitt right in there and Trubisky and it all still works out well. I'm a truther just because it drives everyone else insane.
Yes.
Arif, Mitch Trubisky, Diontae Johnson, what can we expect? Dive into the analytics on this one. and that is it. We have summed up.
That was one of your funniest jokes. I've never seen a reaction like this.
Okay. We got to find out who lines up on the left side of the field.
Thank you. Yes.
and then we gotta buy into the other guy. That's the key. I was looking into the Diontae Johnson, Chase Claypool breakdown, see which one lines up on the left side, which one, because we all know that that's the most important analytic with Mitch Trubisky at quarterback, right? And so I was trying to figure out who lines up on the left more often, who lines up on the right more often. And unfortunately, like most offenses, it's not like the Arizona offense. They do switch around a lot. And so you won't be able to predict from game to game who lines up on the right side more often. So there's not a secret hedge there to try and find the right-sided receiver for Mitch Trubisky. So you're just going to have to figure out kind of the matchups based off of, who you think the Pittsburgh Steelers want to target at cornerback. That's maybe your best opportunity. The thing that gets me, though, is what was his last deal with Buffalo? It was like 1 year, $2 million or something like that. It probably wasn't 2, but I don't know how he goes from that to 14 without doing anything. That boggles my mind. Like when Chase Daniel signed this great backup contract, I want to say with the Eagles from the Saints, that was weird, but I kind of got it, right? Because he wasn't being asked to start. They were just hey, you've got this great reputation as this whiteboard guy, the sideline guy. You can help a quarterback out. You've earned that reputation. We've been hearing, Sean Payton or whoever rant about how good you are. So we're just going to sign you to do that. Fine. But nothing happened with Mitch Trubisky this year that demonstrated that he could start. That is buck wild to me. That I don't understand. But Pittsburgh, we know they make good decisions at quarterback over the past 3 years. Certainly. They haven't made one misstep there. So just have to trust the process.
I don't know what the analytics is on this, but I'm pretty confident even Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers, when you factor in money per passing, I think Chase Daniel actually makes more money per pass than any other quarterback in the National Football League. I think the number's $150,000 per pass is what he's made in his career.
Amazing.
Don't fact check me, but I'm pretty confident that's right up there. But speaking
I'm
of
going to need to
money,
see the Matt Flynn numbers too. That's going to be important as well.
That would be right up there. But speaking of making money and not actually doing anything to get it, how about the number 3 paid wide receiver in the National Football League, Christian Kirk, heading down to Jacksonville? Not only is he getting paid $84 million, but that's all tax free. That bag is secured right now,
baby.
Do we see the Jag? I know they're throwing cash out there. I'm they've let go of Miles Jack. They've moved some good players, in my opinion. Laviska Shenault, do they just hate him? What did Laviska Shenault do to anybody there? He ticked off Urban Meyer, ticked off Doug Peterson already for Peterson's there. You got Zay Jones, you've got Marvin Jones, you got Christian Kirk there as your trio of wide receivers in Duval County.
I think the goal for the Jaguars is just get Trevor Lawrence figured out. Do whatever you can to help him out. Nothing else matters, right? And I think that's it. I wouldn't be surprised if they signed another receiver for $20 million a year. They're just look, we just got to get guys here, man. We'll figure it out in training camp. we'll move Travis Etienne to receiver. We already tried that, right? He's fine. We can move him to receiver. Let's figure it out and get him enough targets that we can just know if he's good and know if he's fine and know that his mental health is being taken care of because these guys are getting open. So I think that's really the idea there. If you're a franchise that is coming out of like a clown show season, you have to pay maybe a little bit more to get the guys that you want in the door. The Jaguars already had a bunch of cap space. They made some more cap space by releasing Miles Jack. And so they're playing with some money. And I think that's kind of what drove a lot of this. Now, as a percentage of the cap, because the cap's always going up, we always talk like, hey, $21 million a year. That's crazy. And like it is, but as a percentage of the cap, when you take a look at it in terms of what the cap is this year versus the wide receiver deals that we're used to, it's not as bad as it sounds. It's still kind of nuts because, like, has he had a 500-yard season yet? Even like, we shouldn't be asking these questions for a $20 million receiver.
Do you think he can be a number one receiver?
No, I think he can be a good receiver.
You didn't at least think about it a little bit, man.
No, there's no pause there.
You can't make me think about it. There's nothing in your power that you can do to make me think about it. No, I think he could be a great two. I think that he's a really great complementary receiver. I don't think he can run an offense through him. I don't know if they have a guy that you can run an offense through. Back when Marvin Jones was like really good, I think he was kind of like this secret underrated version of that guy, but never got an opportunity to because there's always this better, more dynamic receiver opposite him. But he's not going to be able to do that anymore. So I don't know that they've got a number one receiver. I've seen a couple of offenses try to run through a bunch of number twos. It never looks great to me because it relies on your offensive coordinator being better than the opposing defensive coordinator on every single play of every single game of the season instead of just having a guy. And so take a look at the opposite. The Cincinnati Bengals have a plethora of ones, right? They just have number ones. And the Bengals are like, yeah, fine. Who cares about the offensive line? We'll figure the rest out. Right. We have ones. So that's the concern for me is that you've got a bunch of really good receivers to have on a roster, but you don't have an offense yet, even though you've got a bunch of skill players. So they still have to do some more. Obviously, re-signing Cam Robinson or franchising him, whatever they did with him, is going to be part of that in terms of the offensive line, but they do need to do more along the offensive line. And I think they just need a guy, right? And so maybe Laviska Shenault, wins some camp battles or something like that. But, he's the number 3 or 4 running back. He's the number 5 wide receiver. He's going to have to prove that he can do a lot in order to get onto the field.
So real quick here, rapid fire type. Just give me a location where this guy's going to end up. I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 players here for fantasy football, just so people can have an idea because they're not anywhere yet. Starting off with Deshaun Watson. Where's he end up?
Okay, I think that the Cleveland idea that you pitched was, I think Baker's time in Cleveland is essentially done. I think they're kind of sick of him. So I think Cleveland makes sense. You kind of see that they might handle some off-field stuff with a little bit more leniency. Kareem Hunt, I think, is a good example of that. And maybe that kind of helps drive their decision on Deshaun Watson. Plus, wins wipe away a lot of memories, I think is what ends up happening on football teams, as regrettable as that is. So that I don't think Deshaun Watson should be in the league, even though he wasn't charged. I've got my thoughts, but he is in the league. And so I have to deal with that reality. And I think it's probably going to be the Cleveland Browns.
Okay. What about Odell Beckham Jr.? Where's
I'd love for him to go back to the Rams. That'd be really cool. If it hasn't happened yet, I don't think it's gonna happen. So from there, like, I don't know, there's like a lot of opportunities, right? Because I could find like a surprising, like, oh my God, he ends up on the Patriots. How does this personality deal with Bill Belichick? When we've been asking that question about players for the past 10 years, and half the time it just works out fine. Like Randy Moss with Bill Belichick, are they going to be okay? Yes. So I think that would be a pretty fine spot. Plus Mac Jones, the way that he plays offense, can work with what Odell Beckham does. So yeah, I'll just say the Patriots because that's the first team that came to mind.
Jarvis Landry.
Yeah, I don't know. How about the Saints? They could use a receiver. They don't seem particularly, into receivers that need to go deep downfield. Like I know, Marquez Callaway and Kenny Stills have got, but the offense has been built around these slant boys, as you will, and having these underneath guys. And I think forcing I don't know, Jameis is going to be the quarterback, forcing Jameis to consider what underneath options are available to him, understanding that there's a universe below 15 yards downfield. They might think that they can train him to play football.
It will never happen. It will never happen.
You're probably right.
20-yard bombs, 30-yard bombs every play.
How else are you going to keep up with Brady?
Exactly.
And last but not least, Allen Robinson. Where does he end up when it's all said and done?
Oh, geez.
Please say the Raiders. Please say the Raiders to make him happy.
Hey, the Raiders are up to something. They've been too quiet. We don't know what's going on. They got to compete there. We don't know what they're getting on. I think it's corner for the Raiders first and foremost. But Allen Robinson, where's he ending up?
Well, wherever he ends up, I think he's going to be overdrafted. That's my thoughts. But I think he's cooked, man. I feel bad for him because he needs a good quarterback. Why not? Why not the Raiders, right? They could use somebody to pair with Darren Waller as kind of a big play guy. You've got Hunter Renfrow taking care of the underneath stuff. Allen Robinson can help you in the red zone because Darren Waller's good at a lot of stuff, but a red zone tight end, not the same thing. He's not bad at being a red zone guy, but you want a quality red zone guy. I think that, the best of Allen Robinson is probably found in the red zone now. So I think you can complement that offense, have threats at all three levels of the field. Derek Carr is now much more comfortable using every blade of grass more than he used to be, and he can finally use the big arm that everyone at Fresno State loved him for. So, that makes sense to me. Sure, why not? Josh McDaniels will know how to use a player like him.
All right, there you go. You got Allen Robinson going to go play with the Hall of Fame quarterback here in 2022.
So I said the Raiders?
Yeah, you did say the Raiders. Yeah.
You guys are on fire all being said.
We have obliterated our contractually obligated football talk. Just around the corner, we are going to go behind the grind with Arif Hasan here, and we're going to go a little bit deeper. Maybe not quite. We're going to go more analytical into his own personal life, what kind of bed sheets he used, what kind of softener, all that kind of fun stuff. In part 2, just around the corner. But first, head over to fantasypoints.com, enter promo code Vipers22, get 10% off that subscription today. And hey, we'll be right back in just a few seconds.